Maria Donnelly stood on a trembling steel gantry, the air around her a toxic swirl of orange embers and white-hot steam. Above her, the wooden rafters roared with a fire she didn't start. Below her, the molten steel churned like a hungry sun. Her mentor, Bill Vance, stood 5 feet away, his face twisted into a mask of desperation as he leveled a flare gun at her chest. "It's over, Maria," he screamed over the thunder of the burning mill. "The bank already took the deed. By morning, you're not a whistleblower. You're the arsonist who burned Oakhaven to the ground." As the sirens of the approaching police echoed through the shattered windows, Maria looked down at the heavy maintenance ledger clutched in her hand. The ink on the pages was smudged with her father's grease-stained fingerprints from 20 years ago, proving the betrayal didn't start with Bill. It started with her own blood. With the rafters groaning and the floor beneath her buckling, she had to choose. Drop the evidence and leap into the fire, or stay and face the handcuffs for a crime she was framed to commit. The town was waiting for a hero, but the only thing they were going to find was a girl trapped between a lie and a furnace. The heat pressed down like a wet blanket, thick with the stench of scorched metal and diesel. Maria Donnelly wiped her forearm across her brow, smearing grease and sweat into her hairline. The fracture ran jagged along the primary pressure vessel's seam, thin as a spider's thread, but deep enough to split the steel if the system held pressure another hour. Her fingers traced the edge, rough against her calloused skin. The metal beneath her touch felt feverish, thrumming with a violent, contained energy that shouldn't be there. This wasn't just a surface scratch or a cosmetic blemish. It was a lightning bolt of impending death etched into the heart of the Oakhaven steel mill. She could almost hear the molecules of the alloy screaming, pulling apart under a load they were never meant to sustain. The structural integrity had vanished, replaced by a fragile hope that the next cycle wouldn't be the last. She yanked the emergency tag from her belt, the red plastic clattering against the metal as she slapped it onto the valve. The warning sticker peeled at the corner, but it would have to hold. Maria moved fast, her boots thudding against the grated walkway. The mill floor roared around her, gears grinding, furnaces hissing, the rhythmic clang of hammers on hot steel. Every vibration felt like a personal insult to the fractured vessel. She reached the first lockout station, her fingers flying over the switches with a muscle memory born of 20 years in this cathedral of soot. The first lever clicked under her palm, the mechanism stiff with disuse. She needed to bleed the pressure, to starve the beast before it decided to take the whole building with it. The air grew thicker, tasting of ozone and ancient dust, as she worked through the sequence to isolate the primary line. "Donnelly!" A hand clamped onto her shoulder, heavy and familiar. She turned to see Bill Vance. He didn't look like a man concerned with a pressure spike. His face, carved from old leather and stained by decades of tobacco, remained impassive. He looked at the red tag, then back at Maria, his eyes the color of weak, cold coffee. "It's compromised," she cut in, jerking her thumb toward the vessel. "That seam's ready to blow, Bill. We shut it down now, or we're cleaning up bodies. The fracture is deep, past the safety margin." Bill didn't move. He didn't even glance at the vessel. He just stood there, a mountain of a man in a stained button-down, physically occupying the space between Maria and the control panel. "You're seeing ghosts again, Maria. It's a surface stress line. Happens every summer when the humidity spikes. You're being paranoid. Paranoid." Maria's voice dropped, the gravel in her throat catching. "Bill, I've spent my life studying load-bearing structures. That vessel is screaming. If we don't drop the pressure, the morning shift is walking into a graveyard." Bill's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching near his ear. He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her. The morning shift is walking into a production quota we haven't hit in 3 months. Corporate is breathing down my neck, and I won't have you spooking the boys over a hairline crack. You're exaggerating the technicals to justify a break. Now, move." He didn't just ask. He shifted his weight, his broad shoulders forming a barricade. Mariah felt the heat of the furnaces behind her and the cold, immovable wall of her mentor in front. He was using his size, the sheer mass of his authority, to override the physical reality of the failing steel. It was a silent ultimatum. The numbers didn't matter. Only the output did. "I need to reach that panel, Bill," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What you need to do," Bill rumbled, his voice low and dangerous, "is sign the safety logs for the 6 Waro. I've already checked the vessel. It's fine. Sign the log, Maria. Keep the line moving. Don't make this a problem for your career." He held out a clipboard, the paper yellowed and smelling of his cheap cologne. He wanted her name on the lie. He wanted her to be the one who said the world was safe when she knew the foundations were rotting. Maria looked at the signature line, then at the vibrating vessel. The conflict wasn't just about a machine anymore. It was about the weight of every word she had ever spoken. She looked past Bill's shoulder and saw Leo, her young apprentice, watching from the shadows of the tool crib. His eyes were wide, reflecting the flickering orange glow of the molten metal. He knew something was wrong. He could feel the friction between the 2 people who taught him how to survive this place. Before she could answer, a third shadow joined them. Dale Hargrove, the floor foreman, moved with a predatory slouch. He was a man who smelled of stale beer and bad intentions, a hired hand brought in to ensure efficiency at any cost. He didn't look at the machinery. He looked at the inspection tablet clutched in Maria's left hand. "Vance says it's clear, Dale growled, his voice a wet, phlegmy sound. He reached out, his thick, scarred fingers closing around the edge of the tablet. "Hand it over, Donnelly. We'll clear the logs ourselves if you've lost your nerve." "Get your hands off my equipment," Maria snapped, pulling the tablet back. The struggle was instantaneous. Dale didn't hesitate. He lunged, his weight throwing her back against a rack of cooling pipes. The metal was hot enough to sting through her heavy work jacket. Maria's boots slipped on the oily floor, but she didn't let go. She saw the intent in Dale's bloodshot eyes. He wasn't just taking the tablet. He was going to crush it. He wanted the digital record of that fracture gone. She reached for her belt, her fingers closing around the handle of a heavy industrial wrench. It was a reflex, a desperate grab for a lever in a world that had lost its balance. As Dale swung a heavy fist toward her shoulder, she parried with the tool, the metallic clang lost in the roar of the mill. She didn't think. She acted. She used the wrench to hook his arm, twisting her hips to use his momentum against him. With a guttural grunt, she shoved him. Dale stumbled, his boots skidding across the grit-covered concrete. He hit the cooling pipes with a heavy thud, the breath leaving his lungs in a sharp wheeze. He was dazed, the heat of the pipes radiating through his shirt. Maria didn't wait for him to recover. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. On Dale's desk, a battered metal slab covered in coffee stains, lay the physical maintenance ledger. It was an old-fashioned book, the kind Bill insisted on keeping alongside the digital records. Maria snatched it as she ran, the weight of the paper heavy in her hand. She dove into the labyrinth of the secondary processing area, disappearing into the steam and shadows before Bill or Dale could find their footing. She found a narrow crawl space behind the old electrical lockers, a place where the air was stagnant, but the shadows were deep. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She clicked on a small penlight, her hands shaking so violently she had to pin the ledger against her knees. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the dates. She was looking for the last time the pressure vessel had been serviced, looking for the proof that would bury Bill Vance. Then she saw it, the handwriting on the entries from 5 years ago, and 10 and 15. It was a precise, slanted script she knew better than her own. It was her father's hand. He had been the lead inspector before his retirement. Maria traced the ink, her stomach turning. The entries were falsified. The same fractures, the same warnings, all signed off with the Donnelly name. This wasn't a new corruption. It was a generational legacy. Her father hadn't just worked the mill, he had helped build the lie. The realization was a physical blow, more painful than Dale's shove. She wasn't just fighting Bill. She was fighting the ghost of the man who taught her how to read a blueprint. The silence of her hiding spot was shattered by a sound that made the very floor vibrate. It wasn't the rhythmic thud of the hammers. It was a high-pitched, screaming whistle, followed by a roar that sounded like the earth splitting open. A steam pipe had given way. Maria scrambled out of the shadows, the ledger tucked into her waistband. The air in the corridor was suddenly white, a blinding, searing fog of high-pressure vapor. Through the mist, she heard a scream, not the scream of metal, but of a boy. "Leo!" she shrieked, plunging into the heat. She found him collapsed near the junction box, his flannel shirt melted to his shoulder. The steam had caught him full on, a routine maintenance check turned into a nightmare. His skin was already blistering, a raw, angry red that made Maria's stomach heave. She grabbed him under the arms, dragging him back from the hissing rupture. He was whimpering, his dark eyes wide with a shock so deep he couldn't even cry. "I've got you, Leo. I've got you," she whispered, though she couldn't hear herself over the sirens. The mill was in a frenzy, but as the medics arrived, so did the suits. Bill Vance wasn't looking at Leo. He was talking to 3 people in charcoal gray wool that cost more than Maria made in a year. The corporate lawyers had arrived with a speed that suggested they had been waiting in the wings. They didn't offer help. They moved toward Maria's office with the precision of a surgical strike. By the time she had seen Leo into the ambulance, the locks on her door had been changed. A yellow tape, "Legal review in progress," spanned the frame. Her credentials, the plastic card that gave her life meaning, were dead in her hand. They were locking her out of the system, purging her presence before the blood on the floor was even dry. She walked to the parking lot, her head spinning. She reached her old truck and stopped. All 4 tires were shredded, the rubber hanging in ribbons. It was a message, loud and clear. She looked toward the mill, her eyes landing on her locker through the open bay doors. When she reached it, she found a small gray shape on the floor. A sparrow, its neck snapped, tucked neatly into her work boots. A silent warning. "Stay quiet, or be broken." Maria didn't feel fear then. She felt a cold, crystalline anger. They thought she was a rule follower who would break when the rules changed. They didn't realize that she built the rules to keep the world from collapsing. And if the world was going to collapse anyway, she was going to be the one to choose the debris. She checked her watch. It was midnight. The morning news cycle would start at 6. Bill would release a statement then. She could see it already. Operator error. A tragic mistake by a young apprentice. He would bury Leo to save the mill, and he would bury Maria to save himself. She couldn't go through the front. She couldn't use the gates. But Maria Donnelly knew the bones of this place. She climbed the exterior ladder to the primary ventilation intake, a rusted maw that breathed for the entire facility. The ductwork was narrow, filled with decades of soot that coated her skin in seconds. She crawled on her belly, the metal groaning beneath her. It was a tomb of galvanized steel, but it led to the heart of the machine. She was halfway to the server room when she heard the voices below. Radios crackled. Flashlights cut through the grates, lancing into the darkness of the shafts. "She's in here somewhere," a voice barked. "Dale. Vance wants her found before the lawyers finish the press release. Check the steam plant." Maria froze. She was directly above the high-pressure steam room. She looked down through the grate and saw 2 security guards, their black uniforms crisp, their batons drawn. They weren't mill workers. They were mercenaries. She shifted her weight, and a rusted bolt snapped. The ping was like a gunshot in the quiet shaft. "Up there!" Maria didn't wait. She kicked the grate open and dropped, landing on a stack of insulation bags. She scrambled to her feet, the guards already rounding the corner of the massive boiler. She knew this room. She knew every valve, every bypass. She lanced toward the primary manifold, her fingers catching a lever she had repaired only a month ago. "Stop right there, Donnelly." She didn't stop. She yanked the lever. A wall of harmless, low-pressure vapor erupted from the floor vents. It wasn't the killing steam that had hurt Leo. It was a tactical fog, thick and white. The guards vanished into the cloud, their shouts turning to coughs. Maria moved through the whiteout like a ghost. She grabbed a heavy mooring chain from the wall, swinging it in a wide arc. She felt it connect, a dull thud against a shoulder, a clatter of a dropped flashlight. She didn't stay to see them fall. She slammed the reinforced doors shut, throwing the manual deadbolt. They were trapped in a sauna of their own making. She descended further into the basement, the graveyard of the mill. Here, the air was cold and smelled of damp concrete and ancient secrets. She moved past rows of rusted lockers until she found the crates. They were tucked behind a false wall of scrap, hidden from any casual inspection. She pried one open with a crowbar. Inside were steel billets, but they were wrong. Even in the dim light, she could see the pitting, the uneven grain. This wasn't high-grade industrial steel, it was junk. Brittle, recycled slag, masquerading as structural grade. She looked at the shipping manifest tacked to the side. The logo wasn't the mill's. It was a stylized V, Vance Logistics. Bill wasn't just the manager. He was the supplier. He was selling the mill the very poison that was killing it, skimming the profits from both ends. He was the one who had bought the substandard scrap that had fractured the vessel, the scrap that had turned a steam pipe into a bomb for Leo. "You greedy bastard," she whispered, her voice echoing in the hollow chamber. She took out her tablet, the screen cracked but functional. She photographed the manifests, the logo, the brittle metal. This was the kill shot. This was the evidence that turned negligence into a crime. But as she turned to leave, the mill's PA system hummed to life. Bill's voice, amplified and distorted, filled the basement. "Attention all personnel. In honor of our 50th anniversary, an emergency town hall will be held in 1 hour at the Municipal Center. We will be discussing the future of Oakhaven and the new path toward total deregulation. Your presence is mandatory. The future of your jobs depends on it." Maria's blood ran cold. Deregulation. If he got the town to vote for it, the last safety net would vanish. The mill wouldn't just be a danger, it would be a slaughterhouse. She needed more than just the scrap. She needed the money trail. She remembered the remote maintenance substation, a small, windowless shack on the edge of the property that housed the backup servers. It was too small for the lawyers to have bothered with yet. She ran, her boots heavy with the grime of the basement. She She reached the substation, her fingers flying over the keypad. The door hissed open. Inside, the servers hummed, their blue lights blinking like indifferent eyes. She bypassed the encryption. Her father's old password, Maria 1982, still worked. The emails were there, folders labeled incentive programs. She opened one and felt the air leave her lungs. Millions. Diverted from the safety budget, from the repair funds, directly into offshore accounts for Bill and the corporate board. While she was begging for a new pressure vessel, they were buying villas in the Caymans, with the money meant to keep the boilers from exploding. She began the download, the progress bar crawling with agonizing slowness. Outside, the sirens began to blare. The ceremonial start of the town hall. "Come on," she hissed at the screen. "Come on." 98%, 99%. Complete. She yanked the drive and turned to the door, only to find the light blocked. Bill Vance stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his work shirt anymore. He was in a suit, but he held a flare gun in his hand, the orange plastic looking like a toy in his massive grip. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" he said, his voice almost sad. "I gave you everything, Maria. I taught you how to survive. You taught me how to lie, Bill. I'm just a slow learner." He stepped into the room, the flare gun leveled at her chest. "Give me the drive. We can still fix this. I can tell them you found the error, that you're the hero. You can have a seat on the board." "I'd rather have my soul," she said, and lunged. She didn't go for the gun. She went for his knees. They tumbled out of the shack and onto the high-altitude gantry, a narrow metal walkway suspended 80 feet above the vats of molten steel. The heat rose in shimmering waves, the orange light turning the world into a vision of hell. They struggled on the narrow path. Bill was stronger, his hands like iron as he pinned her against the safety railing. The metal groaned, the old bolts protesting the weight. "It's over, Maria," Bill screamed over the roar of the furnaces. "The bank foreclosed this morning. We're stripping the assets tonight. There is no mill left to save." He pulled the trigger. The flare didn't hit her. She ducked, the phosphorus bolt whistling past her ear and lancing into the ancient wooden rafters above the gantry. The dry, oil-soaked wood ignited instantly. A curtain of fire dropped between them and the exit. Bill didn't care. He slammed her back against the rail, his forearm crushing her throat. "I'm calling the police. Arson, Maria. I'll tell them you snapped. You burned the mill to hide your mistakes with the boy." He reached for his radio, his eyes wild with the desperation of a man who had lost everything but his malice. "Dispatch, this is Vance. I have an active arsonist on the gantry, Maria Donnelly. She's burning the facility down." Maria looked up. The ceiling was a sea of flame. The gantry was shaking, the supports weakening as the fire ate into the roof. She could hear the sirens in the distance. Not the mills, but the towns. The police were coming for her. "You're trapped, Maria," Bill sneered, his face lit by the inferno. "Between the fire and the law, and nobody believes a ghost." He turned to run, leaving her to the flames. But Maria Donnelly didn't look at the fire. She looked at the crane. A heavy industrial hook dangled just 10 feet from the gantry, suspended by a rusted but thick steel cable. She calculated the trajectory in a heartbeat. The weight, the arc, the structural load. It was a suicide jump. It was the only way. She climbed the railing. "Maria, don't!" Bill shouted, turning back. She didn't listen. She leapt. Her fingers caught the rusted cable, the metal biting into her palms. She swung out over the molten steel, the heat searing her lungs. The arc carried her through a shattered upper window, the glass shredding her jacket as she tumbled onto the gravel outside the perimeter fence. She hit the ground hard, the breath leaving her in a violent sob. But she was out. Behind her, the gantry collapsed into the vats with a roar that shook the earth. She didn't stop to look. She ran. She ran through the shadows of the scrapyard, dodging the searchlights of the first police cruisers. She could hear the loudspeakers from the town hall 3 blocks away, a tragic act of sabotage by a disgruntled employee. The corporate lawyer's voice boomed across the square. Maria Donnelly, in an act of professional jealousy, has set fire to the heart of our town. Maria reached the town hall doors. She was a nightmare in soot and blood, her clothes torn, her face smeared with grease. The 2 guards at the door stepped back, shocked by the apparition. She shoved past them, her boots echoing on the marble floors of the auditorium. She burst into the room just as Bill Vance was raising a glass to the town council. "Stop!" she screamed. The room went silent. 100 faces turned. Workers, neighbors, the people she had grown up with. Bill stood on the stage, his face paling to the color of ash. "She's dangerous," Bill shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "Sheriff, arrest her." Maria didn't move toward him. She moved toward the tech booth. She slammed her tablet into the manifold, her fingers bypass coding the presentation software she had designed for the mill's safety briefings. "Listen," she commanded. The audio-visual system didn't show the anniversary slides. It played the recording from the gantry. "The bank foreclosed this morning. We're stripping the assets tonight. I'll tell them you snapped. Dispatch, this is Vance. I have an active arsonist." The voice was unmistakable. The admission of the foreclosure, the cold-blooded plan to frame her. It filled the hall like a physical weight. Then she swiped the screen. The bankruptcy filings appeared, the new contract, highlighted in red. "The pensions," Maria said, her voice raw but carrying to the back of the room. "The new contract isn't for job security. It's a liquidation. They're taking the insurance money from the fire and leaving you with nothing. Look at the dates." The workers stood. In the front row, Elena Carter, Leo's mother, rose like a dark tide. She looked at the screen, then at Bill. The silence in the room shifted from shock to something much more dangerous. It was the sound of 100 people realizing they had been sold for scrap. "You son of a bitch," Elena whispered. The crowd surged. They didn't wait for the sheriff. They surrounded the stage, a wall of flannel and denim closing in on the men in suits. Bill tried to reach the side exit, but the workers were already there. Maria walked to the sheriff, her hand steady as she handed him the maintenance ledger and the drive with the scrap manifests. "It's all there," she said. "The brittle steel, the kickbacks, the falsified logs going back 30 years. My father's name is on them, too. Arrest me if you have to. But don't let them walk away." The sheriff looked at the ledger, then at the burning mill visible through the tall windows. He didn't arrest Maria. He stepped onto the stage and put his hand on Bill Vance's shoulder. "Bill Vance, you're under arrest for criminal negligence, fraud, and arson." The cheers that followed were the loudest thing Maria had ever heard. Louder than the mill, louder than the explosion. 6 months later, the air over Oakhaven was clear, but the furnaces were roaring. Maria stood at the main control panel, the new pressure vessel gleaming under the LED lights. It wasn't owned by a corporation in Pittsburgh anymore. The sign on the gate read, "Oakhaven Worker Cooperative." She looked at the safety logs. Her name was at the top. Below it, in a slightly shaky but determined hand, was Leo's. He was back, his arm in a compression sleeve, but his eyes were bright. Maria reached for the primary lever. She didn't feel the weight of a lie anymore. She felt the weight of the truth, and for the first time in her life, she knew the structure would hold. She pulled the lever. The mill hummed to life, a steady, honest vibration that shook the floor. "Pressure steady," Leo called out, smiling. "Steady," Maria agreed, her fingers tracing the smooth, perfect seam of the new steel. "Let's get to work."